So I'm really excited to introduce John Wusu, who is a human developer who believes in helping individuals, families, and communities rise. He grew up in Austell, Georgia, a city near Atlanta, and we are excited to have John with us today. I've heard he's amazing. No pressure. Thank you, John.
All right. Yeah, we cooking with fire now. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am really excited to be here, even though I look really weird fixing my mic right now. And today we're going to talk about roses in concrete, weathering for well-being. So if you haven't already, go ahead and visit menti.com. Use the code 2253020. And if you want access to my slides, you can use this QR code and the link on the right-hand side of the slides. You can go ahead and go to Mentimeter. You can go to Mentimeter now. Yeah. Yeah. And so just like Jill said, I'm super excited to be live right now. It's not quite the same experience being connected over the internet. And so I'm thankful to be here in Boston. This is my first time in Boston. So, yeah. Yeah, Beantown, that's what they say. All right, so quick check-in. This is a really excellent tool. I don't know, raise your hand if you are familiar with the mood meter, with Mark Brackett's work. Permission to Feel is a book that he wrote. But this is one of his resources that I adapted for a very quick check-in activity. So we're experiencing a lot of challenges, right? And this isn't something that is new. These are ongoing challenges. And this pandemic exposed and worsened a lot of them. And so building community is very important. Things like restorative practices are very helpful, and this is a quick check-in tool that can help you build community as you're interacting with your classes, your students, especially in the Tier 1 instructional space. All right, so today it looks like we got a lot of greens and yellows. We got a blue, and we have some who are undecided. The reality is that however you feel is how you feel. You can't control how you feel, right? You can't control how you respond to those feelings. And so it's important for us to know where people are as we're interacting with them. All right. So what is your role? Tell me a little bit about what you all do. All right, we got a lot of school counselors in the room. I'm so shocked. Got a few school counselor leaders and administrator and some other roles. I'm assuming teacher. If you're an other, maybe I should have used a different word. If you're something else, all right, would you mind just sharing with us what your role is? Yes, sir. Intern, okay. All right, anyone else? A lot of interns and students. Okay, cool. So I want you to imagine, like picture in your mind a rose growing through concrete. Picture in your mind a rose going through concrete. If the rose that grew from concrete were a person, who would it be? Who would it be? Maya Angelou, MLK Jr., resilient, my mom. We got the same mom? That's wild. That's crazy. Barack Obama, someone named Renee, indeed. Facts. All right, resilient. All right, so as you can see, there are so many examples of people who have had to navigate adversity in order to get where they are or where they've been. My next question would be, and someone said me, I feel you. My next question would be, what represents concrete in your personal or professional life, school community, or the greater society right now? What is concrete for you? Trauma, inflation, ooh, my goodness. What them gas prices looking like in Boston? Curious. Are y'all in the 5s? 4? Yeah, still too high. Wait. Back in my day, I seriously do remember my mom and I driving around, and we wouldn't stop at a gas station unless it was under $1. So I'm that old now, apparently. All right, so parents, anxiety, money, systemic barriers, discord, expectations, excuse me. Yeah, expectations. All right. So as you can see, there are lots of different people who have lots of different ideas about what that concrete looks like and feels like, including negative attitudes and, of course, mental health. All right, we can go back to the other presentation now. And I wanted to do a quick check-in to see where we were. And now that I know a little bit more about where we are, I can introduce myself to you, right? So I'm John Wosu, and like the wonderful person that introduced me said, I am a human developer with ThinkDiff LLC. I am also a professional learning specialist with Hatching Results, the middle school counselor of the year for last year from my district, Cobb County, Georgia, and also the professional development chair for GSEA. And I'm on the anti-racist subcommittee. I'm a co-chair for MASCA. So I do a little bit of stuff. And the most important part of what I'm about to tell you, I'm sorry, the second most important part, we're gonna get to that. The most important part is the fact that I wouldn't be where I am without my community, right? And so as you can see, these pictures represent all the people who are a reflection of me and the best parts of me. I have my parents and my wonderful mother-in-law, and I don't mean that ironically at all. And then, of course, my wife and son. He'll be 2 in June. That picture needs to be updated. And then my work family, right? So, like I said, that's the most important part of what I had to share. The second most important part is my playlist and my watch list. And so, now watching Atlanta, anybody, if you haven't seen the first episode of this new season, I recommend everybody watch that. Like if they didn't pay me all this money, I would stop right now and we just watch that episode. But Abbott Elementary, yeah, awesome, right? Snowfall, Inventing Anna. These are all great recommendations, y'all. Home Economics, Community is a classic for me. Breaking Points is where I get a lot of my political content from. And then Bluey. Yeah, anyone with a child under the age of 5, y'all know about Bluey, right? I mean, I really be watching those episodes too. Like sometimes he's off doing something else and like I'm engaged. But anyway, now playing Outkast, K-Tronada, and then Afro Beats, Rema, Time and Affection, and Calm Down. Like I'm really jamming right now. So all of this is in our slides. I wanted to go through a quick intro of my research journey. All right. I had to complete an action research project to complete my EDS, my education specialist degree. And so I started with growth mindset. I talked to one of my mentors and they started asking questions like, well, why are we focusing on the individual, right? Why aren't we looking at the systems that individual has to navigate? So I was like, you know what, you're right. I can't argue with that. I shifted then to stereotype threat, which ultimately became implicit bias, but I couldn't get away from systemic discrimination, right? And racism is the big R that we're least likely to talk about. Like we're starting to lean into it a little bit, but not really, right? After 2020, but structural racism kept coming up. And ultimately, I landed on complex adaptive systems. So understanding that all of this stuff is interrelated, and we have to make sure that we're talking about context whenever we're also talking about an individual, right? And so these are things that school counselors know, right? We're trained to do these things, more or less. And depending on how long you've been in the profession, this is like a central part of your training. Not only that, other folks need this training. And so it's up to us to know our stuff, but also be in a position to create buy-in around other people learning about this stuff as well. All right. So this poem, The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur. Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose in concrete long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared. And so that poem is powerful. One of the lines that sticks out to me is long live the rose. So what about this sticks out to you? The fact that the rose stands out. When you see this headline, Kylie Jenner set to be the youngest ever self-made billionaire, what stands out about that? Self-made. Why self-made? Because she's not straight to the point, right? Right. Self-made, right? And so it's a part of our ethos to really love individualism. We love the underdog story. We love the rag to riches story, so much so that it flows throughout so much of our social context. And so the reality is it's incomplete. It is a limited focus because are there some things that Kylie had to do and many others had to do in order to get to where they are? Absolutely. Agency is a real thing. However, there's so much more beyond that. And so traditional school counseling and mental health have also been individual focused historically. And when we talk about self-help, this emphasis on you doing it, you getting better, the reality is that that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are so many incentives for us to continue with that myth of self-help and being self-made. Well, I want to push back on that because I am a rose. I am not the rose. There are many roses. And the reality is that without me, that work wouldn't have been done. But without my community, that especially wouldn't be done. And so I want to go through my journey a little bit. In 17, that's my lovely wife. She's beautiful, right? And in 2017, we were still in Statesboro, Georgia, small town. And she was basically like, I'm about to move back to Atlanta. You can come or go or stay, but I'm going. And so I decided to move back. We moved back together. And I began to organize with my friend Jennifer Susko in 2018. I thought I was going to chill and sit back because I had done some community organizing work while I was in Georgia Southern in Statesboro. But when I transitioned back, I said I'm going to relax, get my life together a little bit. But it took me, less than 6 months before that it started happening and I had to get involved again. So 18 is also when I finished my EDS, y'all. It took me 4 years to finish a 1.5-year degree. Not ashamed about that, maybe a little bit, but not really anymore. And after that, the information that I learned really helped me do work in a way that attracted attention. So we were going to school board meetings and we were talking and we were organizing and talking with other community members. And so eventually we got covered by the AJC. And I eventually began to work with the MASCA DEI committee in 2020. And that year was wild, obviously. That was the year I started working with Hatching Results as well. I was featured in the Washington Post and eventually in the ASCA magazine. Later, I became School Counselor of the Year, and I was featured on PBS NewsHour, brief but spectacular. Most recently, I was featured in NBCC. So it may seem like I'm patting myself on the back a lot right now, which I am, but part of the reason I'm doing this is because it's important for us to advocate for ourselves and our profession. And we want to have the right balance between being confident and humble. Adam Grant talks about this. You want to be confident in knowing the skills that you have to offer so that you can create buy-in, but you also want to be humble enough to know that there's always room to grow. And I think part of our challenge is being nice counselors, right, is sometimes we feel uncomfortable with celebrating ourselves. All right, the work just needs to be done. Someone needs to do it. The kids need it, whatever. Take the time to acknowledge the work that you've done. All right. So I'm a Rose, but I had a ton of support to get to where I am. And I want to take this moment to share with you all some of that support.
All right, so you were saying that one of my teachers recommended me to be tested for ADHD.
ADHD, she thought you had ADHD because you're always touching things and touching people and talking on the red light. What else, John?
I mean, just sometimes, I mean, I don't know.
Touching the walls when you're walking down the
I don't know if it's a racial thing or some teachers evaluate behaviors differently, especially when such behaviors coming from minority students. I mean, what sometimes they call a child being disruptive, a child being too active, a child maybe has ADHD. This is in the case of John here. We've got to note consistently just about every day about what you describe as inappropriate behavior, distracting behaviors.
finishing your schoolwork early.
I had a meeting, so I wanted to know what is going on, but because John keeps saying they didn't do anything. I said, wait a minute. I have to go have a meeting. Teacher, can you please, what is it that he's doing? He said that he keep getting out of his seat. He thought going to the cafeteria, he just stepped out of the line and touched the wall, or touched other student on the classroom. She did acknowledge that he would.
Cafeteria at lunchtime.
That is a very smart student that he finished his work, then
Harassed.
doesn't follow instruction when I tell her just put your head on the desk and until the other students finish, then he will get up, want to help them or want to go get water. I asked so many times, can I get water? I keep telling him. I said, that is not. So this is why you were suggesting him to be tested for ADHD. So what is wrong with it? If he finishes work, which means he's bored. Why don't you get, what plan do you have? I mean, materials, extra assignment. Why don't you give him work, give him book or something to engage him? Basically, the point is that a lot of times, most of these kids, if they don't have people who advocate for them, who speaks for them, probably John would have been labeled. Yeah, he would have been labeled, ADHD.
So I want you to just raise your hand if this experience is familiar. You've seen it in your school. Maybe it happened to you. Maybe it happened to someone you know. Raise your hand. Okay. So I feel myself getting a little emotional, even though it's weird. I've seen that because I made it, right? But part of the reason is because when I sent this out to some of my circle, people were calling me almost immediately like, oh, this happened to me too. And it happened to my cousin. And it was black men, people who were my age, my peers, who were saying that as a boy, I was almost mislabeled. And I was almost put on a track that could potentially lead me somewhere that I didn't want to be when I get older. Right. So when we look at the importance of having an ecological focus, a comprehensive focus, context is so important because if we're only looking at a few factors, we can easily make the wrong decision. And there's nothing wrong with ADHD. If that is something you're experiencing, there are many different ways to respond to that. But part of what we're going to talk about today is why is it that my teacher, who happened to be white, even though she had a preponderance of evidence that could suggest many different things, why is it that ADHD was the first thing that she went to? Or one of the earlier things that she went to? And this is an indictment on that particular teacher, because after the conversations my parents had with her, we had a great relationship. And to be honest with you, as someone because this happened in the second grade, as someone in the second grade, I don't even remember many negative experiences with that teacher. But the other thing that I want to point out when we talk about this idea that we are self-made is that for at least the first 1, perhaps 2 or 3 decades of your life, your success largely hinges upon the people who are making decisions on your behalf. And so the other piece is, are we in a society that supports people who have to make decisions on behalf of other people? All right. So when we talk about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, just raise your hand if you're familiar. And do a quick fist of 5. Fist is, I don't know anything about it. 5 is, I know so much that I could teach it. I could teach a course about it. Where are you all? Okay, fist, we got some 2s, 3s. We got a good range of numbers, which is great. All right, so obviously starts at the center with the child who is surrounded by a series of systems that broaden out, starting with your microsystems, which is like your family. And for me, I had parents. I also had an extended family, the Nigerian community. My dad is from Abia State in Nigeria. We are Igbo. And my mom was born in Mobile, Alabama. So I had access to both of the extended parts of my family to some degree. Additionally, I was an athlete. So I had a lot of coaches. I was a Boys and Girls Club kid. I went there like every day. All right. And then I also grew up in the church. And so I had a lot of micro relationships that were helpful. And so they influenced me, but also my actions influenced them. There was a bidirectional relationship there. So if I was having a rough day, it impacted the people that cared about me. If they were having a rough day, sometimes they may have taken it out on me. I don't think that happened very often, but obviously that is something that could potentially happen. All right. So as you can see, we have the mesosystem, which is interactions between different people in different microsystems of your life. So like the parent-teacher conferences are an example, right? My parents also talk to coaches and other teachers. And so these are things that are happening on a regular basis. We have the exosystem, which represents the larger context. So growing up in Atlanta was really interesting. I got to see a lot of people that looked like me in positions of leadership, and I had no idea just how much that impacted my life. But being able to envision myself in leadership roles was really helpful for me. And then the macro system, things like social discriminations or larger scale types of things that govern our behaviors. All right. So that could also be laws and customs, like in the South, this idea of Southern hospitality. We smile a lot. There's also this element of nice nastiness. Everyone that smiles at you is not happy with you. You know what I mean? Y'all ever heard anyone say, bless your heart? Yeah, they don't always mean bless your heart. So you also have the chronosystem. And so there were life experiences that happened that stood out to me, like this interaction with my teacher and ultimately me being tested into the gifted program. So parents advocating on my behalf was pivotal because I could have ended up in special education, which is not, again, a problem if it is properly diagnosed. But who knows that there are a disproportionate amount of black students, especially black boys, who are in special education because of something like an ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or something like that. When really, if you put that student in a different environment, they behave in a completely different way. All right. So the other piece is things that happen while you're alive. So growing up, I want you to think for a second, what are some major life events that occurred that really changed the way that you view life, right? Some major life events that you remember while you were growing up that were instrumental in how you perceive the world after they happened. All right. Can we share some stuff that comes up for you? 9/11, me too. I remember I was in Miss Pomponio's class. We saw the buildings smoking. I was in 6th grade. Who else? 9/11. Raise your hand actually if 9/11 was one of those events for you. Right. So it could be a major event that's shared, but it also could be a unique event that is specific. Does anyone else want to share before I move on? School shootings. I remember Columbine. Yep. And so when that happened, it was very abnormal. But what do you think our kids would say today about school shootings? Would that be something that is significant? We have drills to prepare for them. It's a normal thing that shouldn't be normal. All right, so thank you all for sharing. Let's move on. So when we talk about ecological systems theory, we view child development as a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of surrounding environments. And so we're looking at everything from your immediate setting all the way to customs, laws, and meaningful experiences over the lifespan. All right. So for ecological counselors, the ultimate goal of counseling is to enhance the fit between the individual and their environment. And so we need to really help our clients or our students understand how to effectively navigate within their ecological niche. That is our role as ecological counselors. And even if you don't use this term, this is stuff that we are trained to do already. This really just is a shift to reframe a little bit so that we can be even more intentional about the work that we do. And this work is by Dr. McMahon and Mason out of UGA. She's now at Georgia State, actually. I don't know if you all are familiar with Erin Mason, but she does great work. And then DeLuga, Gunther, and Ruiz. And so we have to make sure that we have a social justice orientation at the end of the day. We monitor and expand our personal, multicultural, and social justice advocacy, awareness, knowledge, and skills. And so who is familiar with the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies? Raise your hands. Excellent. And so we want more hands to be up, but ultimately, this to me looks like a target, and at the center of that target is multicultural and social justice praxis. And when we talk about praxis, it's this idea that we research and learn, then we try things, and then we reflect on what we tried to see what's working and what we need to do differently next time, and it is a cycle. And so we need to be influenced with a certain level of knowledge when it comes to multiculturalism and social justice work before we engage in any other part of this model. And this inner ring is counselor self-awareness, and then the client worldview. We need to really understand that. We need to have ecological empathy to understand what it's like for them to navigate the situations that they have to navigate every day. And then we can begin working on the counseling relationship. And we need to be doing all of that before we even start to talk about counseling, advocacy, and interventions. All right. So the roads that grew from a crack in the concrete. One, concrete is socially constructed, so are our systems. So we need to acknowledge that there was a designer. This stuff didn't just happen, even though sometimes we like to talk about it as if it did. Also, the land of opportunity, gaps, American incongruence has been a thing since day one. At the time that the forefathers of this country were writing its founding documents, saying things like all men are entitled to inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were writing these things, and at the same time, they were doing something that was contradicting that, right? They were enslaving African bodies. They were participating in the genocide of the indigenous peoples of this land. And so we have, for a long time, had really lofty aspirations and goals, but we don't always do what we need to do to meet those things. And so King knew this, and we love quoting King, right? People love to quote King. But in his speech when he gave the I Have a Dream speech, the part of the speech that we don't quote enough is that it's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. All right. And he was talking about these promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the fact that depending on how you look and how the world treats you, you didn't have access to that. So we have to look for the crack and the concrete. That rose, what are the chances, what are the odds that rose would grow literally through concrete. It is possible that the pressure from plants growing underneath concrete that has been laid can break the surface and grow. But the likelihood is a lot higher if there is a crack, if there is an opportunity. All right. And so the chance for success index really is a great measure of that. It's from Quality Counts in the Education Week, and it considers more of a context, more of a comprehensive context when we talk about what individuals need to be successful and have a true chance for success in life. And so early foundations, things like family income and parent engagement, super important. Massachusetts ranked 8th. School years, from preschool and kindergarten enrollment up until high school graduation, you all ranked 1st out of all the states. And then adult outcomes. What happens after they leave K through 12? Are they going to learn more? Are they having enough income to support the lives that they need and want to have? Can they maintain steady employment of some kind? Again, you all rank pretty high, 2nd. So out of all the states, you all ranked 1st overall in terms of a chance for success. So y'all are doing at least one thing right. Good job. All right. But a chance for success is just that. It is an opportunity. And so while there are some good things happening in Massachusetts and throughout our country for that matter, the reality is that we have seen an increase in signs that it is beginning to get more and more difficult, and the cracks are becoming fewer and fewer. All right, so this is a graph of increased eligibility for free and reduced lunch throughout our nation. Since 2001, it's gone up about 15%, and now more than half of our country's children are eligible for free and reduced lunch, which means that they are living at or slightly above the poverty line. All right. So in addition to that, we just went through this whole pandemic, or we're still experiencing it. But as students were surveyed about what concerns they had transitioning back to school, as you can see, people of every race had significant concerns, but some of these concerns were experiencing social anxiety, loss of academic focus, and or fear of falling behind in school, mental health challenges as a result of the pandemic, so stress or loneliness, family struggles with food, housing, or finances, COVID-19 related health concerns, coping with trauma, coping with loss and grief, right? And one thing that sticks out to me is that when it comes to Black students, on many of these, they're either near the top or the highest, especially when it comes to experiencing social anxiety and coping with trauma. All right. Next, I want us to look at this map of income. So this map represents what income levels individuals grew up in compared to their income levels once they were adults. All right. And as you can see, the yellow and green means that there are higher incomes in adulthood. But I want to really focus on this area. As you can see, it's a little yellow and there's some red there. And this means that while there are opportunities, overall, if we zoom in far enough, there are a lack of opportunities. All right. And when we talk about needing to support because of all of this stress, because of all of this potential trauma, our counselor ratios in some areas are really good. The green represents 250 or less. But when we look at different areas throughout the state of Massachusetts, you can see that those ratios are much higher. And it's much more difficult to deliver the services that our students need in those cases. Would y'all agree? Okay. So we also need to acknowledge the concrete, because life is pretty hard right now. So major stressor for Gen Z and Alpha since 2000, climate change, perpetual wars. Our kids that are in school now, until last year, we have been at war literally for their entire lives. So resources that could go other places are going to funding wars, right? Also, school shootings, housing crises, multiple of them. Rise of social media. There used to be a time where stuff happened and you like, hey, let's just give it a day or two, maybe the weekend, come back and everyone forget about it. No, not anymore. All right, so not only that, when we talk about social media, those algorithms are designed to keep you on as long as possible. So what is it like for a middle schooler, and in some cases elementary schoolers, to first be exposed to social media who haven't developed self-regulation skills to be able to disengage, right? So obviously this is creating all types of challenges. I don't have to tell y'all know, but systemic racial and social inequality and discrimination, which has been ongoing, and 2 to 3 economic recessions. On top of that, we have extreme political dysfunction. Our kids are seeing this. The government is not working the way it's supposed to for many people, and that is a significant concern that has many ripple effects, including decreased stability and well-being for millennial parents and families. If you are an older millennial, you graduated around the early 2000s, you got hit with an economic crash. It was difficult for you to find work. Then, if you by chance started to be able to grow your life and grow your career, we get to 2008 and 2009, boom, another recession. So then recovery starts to happen, 2012, 2013, you start to build your career. What happens again? 2019, 2020, we get hit with this pandemic. It's difficult for you to grow the capital necessary to buy that house in that district with the good schools, right? And not only that, it makes it difficult for you to advance in your career, to make enough money compared to past generations. What does that mean for our students who have millennial parents? Those ripple effects include increased social and economic inequality and risk exposure, increased rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide, and educator attrition, because we're dealing with so much more than we've had to, and we don't have enough resources to support the needs at our schools and in our communities. And mistrust, isolation, and challenges maintaining healthy relationships. At the end of the day, there's a lot of concrete. Am I right or am I right? Last is the increased odds of intergenerational trauma. So many of our students were born into families who experienced trauma and brought that forward into their own lives. Our hope is to be able to create a situation where we can heal that trauma, but because of the experiences that people are having, we're heading in the opposite direction, unfortunately, for a lot of our students and families. So I know y'all wanted to be motivated this morning, but we need to talk about this, right? We need to talk about weathering, the interaction, what happens when you interact with concrete as you're trying to grow. Well, Harvard Center for Child something, I can't remember, child psychology, I think. Anyway, talks about 3 different types of stress: positive, tolerable, and toxic. Positive and tolerable stress are important. They help us get things done. They also protect us from dangerous situations. But toxic stress is prolonged activation of the stress response system. So the cortisol gets pumped through your body. You're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and that's okay if you're really in danger for limited parts of time. But if that's consistent in your life, that's what leads to trauma. And raise your hand if you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences. Good. So Kaiser, Permanente, and CDC did a study in the 90s where they actually tracked experiences that their patients were having, especially those who were experiencing health problems later on in life. And they found that there was a very strong correlation between various forms of abuse, neglect, and household challenges, things like divorce, incarceration, right? Things that we may not think have as much of an impact on a child, but actually the science suggests that it does. These things actually lead to the likelihood of experiencing challenges later on in life. And so there are the capital ACE, adverse childhood experiences, and then lowercase ACEs that weren't included in the study, but we also know contribute to trauma as well. So things like discrimination, poverty, racism. And what did we just talk about an increase in? All of those things, correct? So when we talk about the ACE pyramid, it starts with adverse childhood experiences, but those things are supported by social conditions and local context, what's going on around you, and then also the generational embodiment of historical trauma. And so these things lead to interrupted development, which leads to an increase in unhealthy or risky behaviors, which can lead to disease and early death. And so this is really a health issue. When we're talking about discrimination and stress and all these things, it is truly a health issue, not just a mental health one. And we need to make sure we're speaking the same language as we begin to really unpack what all this means.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I know, right? It always makes me chuckle too. So when we talk about key concepts and root causes, we need to make sure we're using the same language as you're interacting with people who are coming from many different backgrounds and trainings and development of processes. So does this image represent equity or equality? Raise your hand if you think this represents equity. If this image represents equity, raise your hand. If you think this image represents equality, raise your hand. If you're a little confused, raise your hand. All right. So we have community resources, and they're going to two different parts of the city. So does this represent equality or equity? What do we think? All right. So equality is each individual or group of people being given the same resources and opportunities, while equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the extra resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So this is what equity looks like. And a lot of people have a problem with this sometimes, but the reality is that sometimes we need equality and sometimes we need equity. We need to be able to engage in conversations that lead us to the result that is best for our school communities. Now, y'all tell me this. What do you see? I heard black and blue, black and gold, white and gold. Anything else? All right, so for those of you that are saying you see white and gold, can you do me a favor and stop lying? All right. So the reality is that a bias is a habit, is a tendency, a pattern of thought, feeling, or bodily sensations that influence our behavior. And biases occur when there is an information processing error that impacts our software, our mind, and our hardware, our body. And so the reality is that no matter what you see, there's a dress up there. Not only that, we have a bias. We assume that everyone sees the world the way that we do. And it's important as we interact with other people that we understand that people have different perspectives if we want to engage in fruitful conversations. Bias is important because those ideas and assumptions that we make about a dress may be fairly insignificant, but when we make those assumptions about people, it can lead to policies and practices that ultimately create inequitable outcomes and racial disparities. And so we look at these things, we need to look at these things as symptoms. Sometimes we look at them as the cause, but really they represent symptoms. The problem is the policies, and the underlying root causes are the way we think about things and people. And so being anti-racist is an action-oriented stance in which one recognizes and works to eliminate racist ideas, practices, structures, policies, and beliefs in all levels of society and its institutions. It is much more than just not being racist. When we talk about social justice, it's both a process and a goal. The goal is full and equal participation. We're talking about social and political. And then it's the participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. Social justice includes a vision of society in which the distribution of resources, we're talking about economics right now, is equitable and all members are psychologically and physically safe and secure. Again, we're talking about political. So we need to be focused on political domain, economic domain, and the social domain in order to fully realize what I call essential justice. And when we talk about an iceberg, we know that only a portion of it is what we see. There's so much more beneath the surface. And so if we're only focused on race, gender, or things that we can visibly see, we're limiting ourselves because people are so much more than that. And if we do that, we can have titanic consequences. So we also want to recognize intersectionality because my experience as a black person may be different than a black person who is queer or a woman or an immigrant, right? Or someone of a different race. And so even though we may share some characteristics, we need to understand that there are very unique experiences that all of us have based on that intersectionality. And so some assumptions that will help us effectively engage is that all people are individuals and members of social groups. These social groups are valued unequally in society. Social injustice is real, it exists today, and results in unequal access to resources between groups and people. And we must engage in self-reflection about our own role in perpetuating all of these things. So by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. These quotes really spoke to me. Your excuses are valid, so what do we do now? Whatever you're experiencing is real. I'm not here to negate that. But what are we gonna do? Eric Thomas says, you're already in pain, you're already hurt, get a reward from it. If you feel like you need to be somewhere else, that's cool. Go be somewhere else. You don't have to do this, right? And compassion fatigue is real. If you need to heal, heal. That's what's best for you, but it's also what's best for the people that you're trying to support. But if you are going to be here, how can you do it in a way that's going to lead to some type of outcome that will be best for you and your community? We're not outnumbered, we're out-organized, said Malcolm X. And not everything that we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it, said James Baldwin. So weathering for well-being. We're going through all this stuff anyway. It's stressful, it's hard, the concrete is real. But how can we do it in a way that leads towards more well-being? First, we have to face the reality that we need to change our focus. Right now, a lot of people say that your choices either lead you to positive or negative outcomes in life. But what we know as ecological school counselors is that it's not just your choices, is also your biology and your social environment that contribute to these outcomes. Genetics load the gun and environment pulls the trigger. Adverse childhood experiences, if we have those, are more likely to create a situation where you experience disease, disability, and social problems and early death, right? We want to avoid those as much as possible, but the reality is that sometimes we can't because what has happened to our family before us impacts our life before we even get here. So much of what we experience is a dice roll. There's a tremendous amount of luck because, like I said, those first 3 decades of life largely hinge upon people who are making decisions on your behalf. So what does this mean for us? It means that if we're only focused on choices, it's limited focus. We need to have a comprehensive focus before we start to really engage in creating interventions. We have to think this. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We have to change the way we think by thinking differently, but we also need to visualize what a world without those challenges looks like, where those problems are solved. And in such a world, we would celebrate, right? So when we think about diversity, it's like being invited to a party. Inclusion is like being asked to dance. Belonging is being able to dance like no one's watching. Like Nelly said, when you in front of the mirror talking to your best friend, like, ooh, girl, my, right? Fairness is being able to have a safe, enjoyable, and meaningful party experience no matter who you are. All right, and these are things that we have to consistently work at, but we must develop fair processes that lead to fair outcomes. And that's perceptions, policies, priorities, practices, and performance indicators. When we talk about essential hope for essential change, essential means school counselors are focused on the ecological levels, so that's tiers, domains, and scope that are necessary for desired change, and the science of hope. Hope is a belief that the future will be better and you have the power to make it so. Hope is based on three main ideas: desirable goals, pathways to goal attainment, and agency or willpower to pursue those pathways. And so when we look at closing the gaps, school counseling to close the gaps, one thing that I really want to focus on is that there's an emphasis on individual student factors in traditional school counseling. This student is unmotivated, depressed, or angry, right? They won't do what the teacher says. But now we need to emphasize social, cultural, and environmental factors. So things like racism and poverty provide a context for us to design interventions that influence the students and educators' behavior. So we're looking at interactions, you all. Last, as we transition to the end, multi-tiered, multi-domain systems of support. We have interventions that impact all students, some students, and a few students. And we're advancing the support based on data. And so we're also considering all three of our domains: academic, social, emotional development, and career development. Those should be integrated in the work that we do. And it's a part of a multi-tiered system of supports that leads to improvements in attendance, discipline, achievement, and cultivating positive culture and climate. For me, my shorthand for that is we help show up, grow up, glow up, and sew up better. And tools for ecological success. These documents will help you. We went through this process. We're currently applying for RAMP next year, so we're preparing this year. But these are amazing documents. If we're really talking about being intentional about creating change, these are super helpful. And the student standards and mindsets and behaviors for student success have recently been updated. But there's even instructions on exactly what you need to do so that you can create the type of change that your students hope for and that your school community needs. Am I making sense? So from uncharted to charted, landscape sense making is one thing that is super important. So which of these really reminds you of your current situation? When you look at the landscape, is the direction clear that you need to go in? Is the destination clear on where you need to be? Is it unclear, where you don't know exactly where you need to go? You can find out with some expert support, but you need to ask for help to get there. Is it very confusing? You've never been here before, or you don't realize where you need to go or where you even need to start? Or is it chaotic? Everything feels like it's on fire. Y'all know that meme with the dog that's in there, like everything is fine, all right? Yeah. Last, or are we unsure? Is it unclear where we are because you're doing so many things and moving so fast that you haven't been able to even take a proper assessment of what life is like right now? So raise your hand if you're an A. It's really clear for you. All right, no A. Okay, cool. So if you were in A, then you just need to make sure you're doing what needs to be done. The policies in place are working. You need to make sure that they're implemented. So we're talking about fidelity at this point. If you are in B, raise your hand if you're in B. Things are it's a little weird, but with some help, you can get where you need to go. All right, so low agreement means that everyone's not in agreement on the best way forward. If that is the case for you, that means you need to do some collaboration. There's some politics involved. We're talking about power structures, so you need to negotiate. Maybe you need to, what's that word? Where you give and take? Yeah, compromise, perhaps, right? So, low certainty. If you're complicated, low certainty, that means that you need to motivate and inspire. You need to make sure people understand why your way is the best way. Use evidence, data to really support whatever arguments you're trying to make. Who's in C? You don't know where it is. You know you're somewhere, but you don't even know what's happening right now. All right. Complex learning. So an example of this could be conversations around race for white people. And if this is the case for you, you need to tread softly. And you need to try things to see what are going to work and use whatever information you have available to you to put yourself in the best position possible. If this is you in your school's community, this is a complex situation, so it's going to require creativity. You're going to have to figure out some things that you haven't done before. Keep trying things, seeing what's working, and building on what's working. Do more of what's working, less of what is not, right? And if you're in crisis, like go get some water or something, right? We're talking about triage. You can't do everything, right? And it's okay. You need to figure out what is not essential and what is. Last, if you're here, clarification or needs assessment of some kind to figure out what exactly your location is, what your landscapes look like. Is this helpful at all? All right. So do me a favor, do this. Thank you, I appreciate it. Okay, stop. So this is the power of long live the roses that grew from a healthy ecosystem. We're looking to create ripple effects that resound and create the types of outcomes that we're looking for. You don't have to work super hard to do that all the time. Sometimes you gotta work smart. You have to use policy, you have to use conversations, communications that lead to the outcomes that we want. And so we also need to understand that education is one part of the ecosystem that everyone needs to navigate, and that all these things are interconnected. So to review, we exist in interconnected ecosystems, inequality is a thing, acknowledge concrete and cracks, we have to weather for well-being. We're going through the hard stuff anyway, how can we do it in a way that's gonna help us get to where we wanna go? We need a comprehensive, not a limited focus, close opportunity gaps by leveraging the power of your school counseling program, and chart your uncharted territory to figure out the best way forward. So was anything that you heard today remarkable, meaning that it's worth making a remark about to someone else? If so, follow me, ask me stuff, contribute, tell someone about me, share my content at John New or at John J. New at Think That Life. Review my resources, here are the links. Visit my store, check your share your testimonials. I'll be collecting those today. If you thought this was helpful, I would love to hear from you. And then come to my next session. I'm presenting at 9:15 or 9:30, right? And if no, you can come to my next session because I'm going to go deeper on ecological systems. If you find that valuable, come check me out. But still complete the survey. Even if you're like, his head was too bald for my liking, the gleam for the lights was blinding me, like whatever the feedback is, please share it. It'll help us. It also help your conference be more effective. So you all were awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Awesome.
Thank you, John. You did not disappoint. I'm so excited to see you. Okay, guys, this is where you guys have about 15, a little bit less than 15. You have 13 minutes till the next session start. Most of them are downstairs, but we do have our grad students out with their posters, so you can check them out in the foyer. And they're downstairs. And the stairs are over this way, so make a left and then have a great day.